Part 1. The hum beneath our feet. Our planet, a swirling blue marble against the inky blackness of space. We perceive it as solid, dependable, the very foundation of our existence. But what if, beneath the crust of rock and churning magma, something far more extraordinary, far more enigmatic, lies hidden? What if at the very heart of our world, a secret fire burns, not of conventional geophysics, but of something else? The idea, once confined to the fringes of scientific speculation, is beginning to gain traction. Could the Earth's core be a massive, ancient nuclear reactor? The conventional model of Earth's core paints a picture of immense pressure and heat, iron and nickel swirling in a molten dance. This model explains the planet's magnetic field, a vital shield against harmful solar radiation. It explains the subtle tremors that ripple through the planet's crust. It seems complete, satisfying. But certain anomalies persist, whispers of inconsistency that refuse to be silenced. These anomalies, like subtle glitches in a complex machine, hint at the possibility of a different kind of engine at the heart of our world. An engine powered not by the simple physics of pressure and heat, but by the immense, controlled power of nuclear fission. The first anomaly lies in the Earth's heat flow. While the conventional model predicts a certain rate of heat radiating from the planet's surface, measurements consistently reveal a higher value. Where does this excess heat originate? Could it be a byproduct of nuclear processes deep within the Earth? The question hangs in the air, a tantalizing possibility. Then there are the isotopic ratios. The relative abundances of certain elements, specifically helium-3 and helium-4, differ from what we would expect if the Earth's core were solely composed of primordial material. Helium-3, a rare isotope, is produced in nuclear reactions. Its presence in volcanic gases, seeping up from the mantle, raises eyebrows. Could this be a fingerprint, a telltale sign of a nuclear furnace churning away miles beneath our feet? Further fueling the speculation is the Earth's magnetic field, a dynamic, fluctuating phenomenon that protects us from the solar wind. While the conventional model attributes this field to the movement of molten iron, certain irregularities in its behavior remain unexplained. The field's strength fluctuates, its poles wander, and even complete reversals have occurred throughout Earth's history. Could these variations be linked to the fluctuating output of a massive, natural reactor deep within the Earth? The notion of a natural nuclear reactor isn't as outlandish as it might seem. In 1972, evidence of a natural fission reactor was discovered in Oklo, Gabon, Africa. This site, dating back nearly 2 billion years, demonstrated that under specific geological conditions, self-sustaining nuclear chain reactions can occur naturally. If it happened once, could it be happening on a far grander scale, hidden deep within our planet? The implications of such a discovery would be profound. It would reshape our understanding of planetary formation, of geophysics, and perhaps even of life itself. Imagine a world powered not just by the sun's energy, but also by the constant hum of nuclear fission emanating from its core. This internal engine could have influenced the evolution of life, providing a constant source of heat and energy, shaping the very environment in which life arose. The challenges in proving this theory are immense. Direct observation of the Earth's core remains impossible. We are limited to indirect measurements, subtle clues whispered through the thick layers of rock and magma. Neutrino detectors, sensitive instruments designed to capture these elusive particles, could potentially provide further evidence. Neutrinos, produced in nuclear reactions, could offer a glimpse into the processes occurring deep within the Earth. The scientific community remains divided. Skeptics point to the lack of conclusive evidence, the immense pressures and temperatures that could hinder sustained fission. But the proponents of the theory persist, driven by the nagging anomalies and the tantalizing possibility of a world far more complex and dynamic than we ever imagined. The debate continues, a testament to the enduring human quest to understand the secrets of our planet. The hum beneath our feet remains, a constant reminder of the mysteries that lie hidden at the heart of our world. The question remains, what if the Earth's core is not just a furnace, but a fire of a different kind, a slow, steady burn powered by the ancient alchemy of nuclear fission? The tremor returned, a low guttural rumble that seemed to emanate not from the Earth, but from the very pit of my stomach. Dr. Aris scanned the readouts, his brow furrowed. a sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead. It's intensifying and accelerating. He tapped a series of commands into the console, the holographic projection of the Earth's core shimmering and pulsing in ominous crimson. The previously stable hexagonal structures within the core, the ones we theorized were responsible for the geothermal energy, were now glowing with an unnatural luminescence, their edges blurring, shifting, almost breathing. The decay rate is off the charts. It's like something's activating them, Aris whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing subterranean growl. We all exchanged uneasy glances. The initial excitement of discovery had been replaced by a primal dread. What we had initially mistaken for a natural geothermal phenomenon was beginning to look disturbingly artificial. A reactor, a colossal, ancient reactor at the heart of our planet. And it was waking up. The tremors were becoming more frequent, more violent. Loose equipment rattled, papers scattered across the floor, and a low, persistent hum began to permeate the air, a sound that vibrated not just through the observatory, but seemed to resonate within our very bones. It was a disquieting, otherworldly hum that spoke of immense power, ancient and unknowable. We need to inform the authorities, Dr. Ramirez stated, her voice tight with anxiety. She reached for the satellite phone, but hesitated. What do we even tell them? That the Earth's core is a giant, alien machine that's about to what? None of us had an answer. We were staring into the abyss, and the abyss was staring back. The core's crimson glow intensified, bleeding into the surrounding layers, the holographic image now resembling a pulsating, diseased heart. Over the next few hours, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The tremors escalated into full-blown earthquakes, cracking the observatory walls and sending fissures spider webbing across the floor. The humming intensified, morphing into a deep, resonant drone that pressed against our eardrums, a physical manifestation of the unimaginable power churning beneath our feet. Outside, the world was descending into chaos. News reports crackled over the emergency radio, fragmented and panicked accounts of widespread seismic activity, volcanic eruptions, and bizarre atmospheric phenomena. The sky shimmered with unnatural auroras, pulsating in time with the core's rhythmic thrumming. We were trapped, isolated in our mountaintop sanctuary, witnessing the unraveling of the world as we knew it. The rational part of my mind struggled to comprehend the sheer scale of the event, the impossible reality of an ancient, alien reactor powering our planet, now seemingly malfunctioning, threatening to tear the world apart from the inside out. The holographic projection of the core flickered, then died. The console sputtered, emitting a plume of acrid smoke. We were blind now, cut off from the very thing we had so desperately sought to understand. The silence that followed the console's demise was deafening, broken only by the ominous groaning of the earth itself. Then, a new sound emerged, cutting through the cacophony of seismic chaos. It was a high-pitched whine, thin and piercing, emanating from deep within the earth, growing louder with every passing second. It was a sound that defied explanation, a sound that spoke of something, awakening. What is that? Ramirez whispered, her eyes wide with terror. Aris shook his head, his face pale and drawn. I don't know, but I don't think we want to find out. The whine intensified, morphing into a deafening shriek, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The ground beneath us heaved violently, throwing us to the floor. Cracks raced across the ceiling, showering us with dust and debris. The observatory was collapsing around us. Through the widening fissures in the walls, I caught glimpses of the outside world, bathed in an unearthly crimson glow. The sky writhed and twisted, the aurora intensifying into a blinding spectacle of light and energy. And then, I saw it. A colossal, shimmering form, rising from the earth miles away, its outline blurred and indistinct against the crimson sky. It was immense, dwarfing the surrounding mountains, a gargantuan silhouette against the backdrop of the apocalyptic dawn. The shriek intensified, resonating with the pulsing light emanating from the colossal form. As the observatory finally succumbed to the Earth's convulsions, and darkness closed in, I knew, with terrifying certainty, that the Earth's core wasn't just a reactor. It was a prison, and whatever was inside, it was now free. The tremors continued, escalating in frequency and intensity. No longer were they the gentle shudders that had merely rattled windows. Now, deep groaning sounds accompanied the shaking, like the earth itself was protesting some unseen violation. Dr. Aris Thorne, his face pale and drawn, barely registered the coffee Professor Armitage offered him. His eyes were fixed on the seismograph readout, the jagged lines painting a picture of growing unrest. "It's spreading," Aris croaked, his voice rough from lack of sleep. "The seismic activity is spreading outwards, like ripples in a pond." "But the epicenter remains the same?" Armitage inquired, his brow furrowed. "Yes," Aris confirmed, "deep beneath the Mariana Trench. Deeper than we've ever recorded any natural quake." The unsettling silence in the observation room was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the equipment and the distant rumble of the earth. The team had worked around the clock since the initial anomaly, analyzing data, running simulations, and desperately searching for an explanation. But the truth, however fantastical it seemed, was becoming increasingly unavoidable. Something was stirring in the heart of the planet. Something unnatural. The initial theory, a previously unknown tectonic plate shift, had been swiftly discarded. The energy readings were off the charts, exponentially higher than anything a natural phenomenon could produce. The heat emanating from the Earth's core was also steadily increasing, causing a subtle but measurable rise in global temperatures. And then there were the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible whispers, picked up by the ultra-sensitive acoustic sensors they deployed deep beneath the ocean's surface. They were initially dismissed as interference, background noise from the immense pressure and geological activity. But after filtering out all known natural sounds, the whispers remained. They were low, guttural, and utterly alien. "I've enhanced the recordings," Dr. Lin announced, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the unnerving silence. She played the audio through the room's speakers, and the whispers, amplified, sent shivers down everyone's spines. They weren't random sounds. They possessed a rhythm, a cadence, almost like language. A language unlike anything they'd ever heard. Professor Armitage, a veteran geologist who had dedicated his life to understanding the Earth, shook his head in disbelief. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice thick with a mixture of awe and fear. Over the next few days, the situation worsened. The tremors became almost constant, disrupting daily life across the globe. Governments issued warnings, advising people to prepare for potential earthquakes. But the official statements carefully avoided mentioning the true nature of the threat, fearing mass panic. The whispers, however, continued to grow louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the very fabric of the planet's rumbling. Aris, driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening, began to delve deeper into the ancient texts he'd discovered months earlier, the texts that had hinted at the Earth's core being a massive, ancient reactor. He pored over the cryptic symbols and archaic language, trying to decipher their hidden meanings. He discovered references to a primordial energy source, a heart of fire, that gave life to the planet, and to a race of beings who had harnessed its power. One passage, particularly chilling, spoke of a great slumber and a time of awakening. Aris felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He realized with growing horror that the whispers, the increasing heat, the escalating tremors, they were all symptoms of the reactor coming back online. One evening, while studying the seismic data, Aris noticed something peculiar. The tremors weren't just random. They were following a specific pattern, a complex sequence of pulses that seemed to resonate with the whispers. He painstakingly transcribed the pattern, converting the seismic waves into a visual representation. He stared at the resulting diagram, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a symbol identical to one he'd seen in the ancient texts. A symbol that represented the awakening. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The reactor wasn't just reactivating. It was being activated. And the whispers, the strange, alien language, were not just random sounds. They were instructions, commands. He rushed to Professor Armitage, the diagram clutched in his trembling hand. "We need to tell someone," he urged, his voice strained. "We need to warn the world." Armitage, his face etched with concern, looked at the diagram. He understood the implications immediately. "It's too late," he said grimly, his gaze drifting towards the seismograph, where the needles were now dancing wildly, tracing a pattern of imminent catastrophe. The whispers, no longer faint, filled the room, growing louder, more powerful, morphing into a deafening roar. And deep beneath the Mariana Trench, in the heart of the planet, something ancient and terrible began to stir. The Earth's core, the massive, ancient reactor, was awakening. Part 4. The Whispers of the Deep. The tremors had become a constant, a low thrumming vibration that permeated everything. Sleeping was impossible. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, was amplified, twisted into something sinister by the omnipresent tremble. Even the air felt thick, charged with an unseen energy that prickled the skin. The news, what little we could get, was fragmented and contradictory. Governments were downplaying the severity, blaming increased seismic activity on tectonic plate shifts. But the internet, that chaotic whispering gallery of anxieties, was abuzz with theories, each more outlandish and terrifying than the last. Hollow Earth theories, alien interference, the biblical apocalypse. They all seemed plausible now, held aloft by the palpable dread hanging in the air. Dr. Aris Thorne, the geophysicist I'd contacted, had gone silent. His last email, sent 2 days ago, simply read, "They were right. God help us all." Then, nothing. I tried calling, emailing, even contacting his university, but he'd vanished. His disappearance added another layer of unease to the growing sense of impending doom. The changes weren't confined to the tremors. The animals were acting strangely. Birds flew in erratic patterns, their calls sharp and frantic. Dogs howled incessantly at the empty sky. Even the insects seemed agitated, a constant, buzzing hum filling the air. It felt as though the very fabric of nature was fraying. One evening, while sitting on my porch, trying to find some semblance of peace in the unsettling quiet, I noticed it. A faint, rhythmic pulsing, almost imperceptible, like a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from the earth, but from the air itself. I closed my eyes, focusing on the sensation, and the pulsing intensified. It wasn't a steady beat, but more of a complex rhythm, almost coded. I rushed inside, grabbed my radio scanner, and began cycling through the frequencies. Static, mostly, but then, buried beneath the white noise, I heard it. A low, guttural humming, interspersed with clicks and whistles. It sounded organic, almost alive. I adjusted the tuning, trying to isolate the signal. As it became clearer, the pulsing in the air grew stronger, resonating within my very bones. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't human, that much was certain. It was primal, ancient, emanating from a depth that defied comprehension. It felt wrong, a violation of some fundamental law of the universe. Listening to it, I felt a creeping dread, a visceral fear that burrowed deep into my soul. I recorded the sound, desperate to share it, to prove I wasn't going mad. I sent it to a few trusted friends, to online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The responses were mixed. Some dismissed it as radio interference, others as a hoax. A few, however, recognized the strangeness, the unsettling otherworldly quality of the sound. They echoed my fear. That night, the tremors intensified. The house groaned and shuddered, as if something immense was shifting beneath the surface. The pulsing in the air became almost unbearable, a constant pressure against my eardrums. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the whispers of the deep. Then, it happened. A blinding flash of light erupted from the east, illuminating the night sky with an unnatural, sickly green glow. The house shook violently, throwing me from my bed. Books tumbled from shelves, glass shattered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone. The pulsing intensified, becoming a deafening roar. I crawled to the window, peering out at the chaotic scene. The green glow pulsed in the distance, casting long, distorted shadows. And then, through the roar, I heard it. A voice, or rather, a chorus of voices, whispering, chanting, in a language I didn't understand, but somehow, instinctively, knew was ancient and malevolent. The chanting grew louder, drowning out the roar, filling my mind with images of vast, subterranean caverns, pulsating with otherworldly energy. I saw monstrous shapes moving in the shadows, things that defied description, things that shouldn't exist. The earth beneath my feet began to crack, splitting open, revealing a pulsating, green light from the depths. The chanting reached a crescendo, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever lay at the heart of the earth was waking up. And it was not benevolent. The last thing I remember before the world went black was the feeling of the earth opening up beneath me, swallowing me whole into the whispering darkness. Part 5. The Whispering Sickness. The tremors grew more frequent. No longer were they relegated to the dead of night. They shuddered through the day, rippling the coffee in our mugs, rattling the window panes, a constant, unsettling reminder of the boiling heart of our planet. The news avoided the topic, focusing instead on political squabbles and celebrity scandals, a desperate attempt to maintain a semblance of normalcy. But the whispers had started. Not actual whispers, not at first. It began as a low, pervasive hum, a suboral thrumming that resonated deep in the chest. Doctors dismissed it as tinnitus, stress, anything but what it truly was. But the hum intensified, evolving into a distinct, pulsating rhythm, like a gargantuan heart beating far beneath our feet. It became inescapable, a constant companion, weaving itself into the fabric of our lives. Then came the dreams. Vivid, unsettling dreams of vast, subterranean caverns bathed in an unnatural, pulsating light. Geometric structures, impossible angles, and surfaces that seemed to shift and breathe. And within these structures, figures. Not human, not quite, but vaguely humanoid, elongated and gaunt, their skin the color of polished obsidian, their eyes glowing with an internal luminescence. They never spoke in the dreams, but their presence exuded an alien intelligence, cold and calculating. The dreams were followed by the whispers. Faint at first, barely discernible over the constant hum, they seemed to emanate from the very air itself, slithering into your ears, burrowing into your mind. They spoke in a language no one understood, yet everyone instinctively knew they were being addressed. The whispers were insidious, worming their way into your thoughts, planting seeds of unease, of paranoia, of dread. Dr. Ramirez, bless his weary soul, was the first to truly break. He'd been working tirelessly, analyzing seismic data, poring over the cryptic signals emanating from the core. He was convinced he was close to a breakthrough, close to understanding the nature of the reactor, the source of the whispers. But the closer he got, the more erratic he became. He started talking to himself, muttering incoherently about geometries of power and the awakening of ancient intelligences. He stopped sleeping, claiming the whispers wouldn't let him. Then came the day he barricaded himself in his lab, ranting about the impending assimilation. Security had to break down the door. He was found huddled in a corner, eyes wide with terror, whispering back to the silence. The incident with Dr. Ramirez was quickly hushed up, attributed to stress and overwork. But it was a turning point. The whispers, once subtle, grew bolder, more insistent. The hum intensified, vibrating through our bones, a constant reminder of the growing power beneath our feet. People began exhibiting strange behaviors. Episodes of unexplained aggression, fits of uncontrollable weeping, catatonic states punctuated by bursts of nonsensical babbling. The mental hospitals were overflowing. The streets were increasingly unsafe. I tried to maintain a semblance of sanity. I buried myself in my work, trying to decipher the patterns in the seismic data, hoping to find a scientific explanation, a rational solution. But the whispers found me even there, insinuating themselves into my thoughts, poisoning my logic. I started seeing the geometric patterns from my dreams everywhere I looked. In the cracks in the sidewalk, in the arrangement of clouds in the sky, in the very structure of the molecules I studied. The world was warping around me, conforming to the alien geometry of the core. One night, I woke up to the sound of my own whispering. I couldn't understand the words I was speaking, but I felt their meaning, cold and alien, slithering through my mind. I looked in the mirror and saw my own eyes glowing with an unnatural luminescence. Terror gripped me, cold and paralyzing. I knew then that the whispers were winning. The assimilation had begun. The world outside was descending into chaos. Riots erupted in the streets. Governments crumbled. The veneer of civilization was peeling away, revealing the primal fear beneath. And through it all, the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent, promising power, knowledge, transcendence. A terrible, seductive promise. I knew I couldn't stay. I had to escape, to find a place where the whispers couldn't reach me. A place where I could hold on to the last vestiges of my sanity. But where could such a place exist? The Earth's heart was poisoned, and the infection was spreading outwards, consuming everything in its path. The whispers were everywhere, and they were calling my name. What if the Earth's core was a massive ancient reactor? Part 6. The tremors were becoming more frequent now, shaking the research outpost with a sickening regularity. They weren't the sharp, violent jolts of a typical earthquake. These were slow, grinding shudders, as if some immense beast were shifting in its sleep miles beneath our feet. The low, resonant hum, previously only audible through specialized equipment, was now a constant, pervasive drone that vibrated in our teeth and bones. Sleep had become a luxury. The constant fear of the unknown, coupled with the unsettling physical sensations, kept us on edge. Dr. Alvarez, normally the picture of composure, had begun pacing relentlessly, muttering to herself in Spanish. Her eyes, usually bright with scientific curiosity, were now haunted, shadowed with a growing dread. The communication blackout persisted. Our desperate pleas for contact with the surface were met with only static. We were utterly alone, trapped in a metal coffin miles beneath the Earth's surface, listening to the planet's death rattle. One evening, while reviewing seismic data, I noticed an anomaly. A new type of wave was propagating outward from the core, distinct from the usual P&S waves. This new wave was slower, more rhythmic, almost pulsating. I showed it to Dr. Alvarez, and for the first time since the crisis began, a flicker of something other than fear crossed her face. It was fascination? This is unlike anything I've ever seen, she whispered, her fingers tracing the wave pattern on the monitor. The frequency, it's almost biological. Biological? The word hung in the air, heavy with horrifying implications. The thought that the core, the heart of our planet, could be something alive, was beyond comprehension. The following days were a blur of increasingly erratic readings and escalating paranoia. The rhythmic pulsations grew stronger, permeating the very air we breathed. We started experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams, visions of molten landscapes, colossal shadowy figures, and eyes the size of mountains staring back at us from the depths of the earth. Then came the whispers. At first, we dismissed them as auditory hallucinations, side effects of the stress and the strange vibrations. Faint, indistinct murmurs that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. But they grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the background hum until they were undeniable. They weren't in any language we recognized. Not human, certainly. They sounded ancient, guttural, filled with a chilling intelligence. Sometimes they seemed to be calling out, other times conversing amongst themselves in a complex, rhythmic pattern that resonated deep within our skulls. One morning, we awoke to find strange symbols etched onto the metal walls of the common area. Complex, geometric patterns that seemed to writhe and shift before our eyes. Dr. Alvarez, her face pale and drawn, identified them as variations of ancient Sumerian cuneiform, a language she had studied extensively during her archaeological research. These are warnings, she stammered, translating the fragmented text. They speak of a being, a slumbering god, imprisoned within the earth, its awakening, the end of all things. The whispers intensified, becoming almost deafening. The metal walls of the outpost began to vibrate violently, groaning under immense pressure. The rhythmic pulsations from the core reached a fever pitch, a throbbing heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with our own terrified pulses. Then, the floor beneath us gave way. We plunged into darkness, screaming as we fell into a seemingly bottomless chasm. The whispers followed us down, growing louder, more menacing, as the earth closed in around us. We were falling into the heart of the planet, towards the source of the hum, the whispers, the terror. We were falling towards the ancient reactor, towards the slumbering god. And as we fell, I realized with chilling certainty that the reactor wasn't just awakening. It was hungry. The fall seemed to last an eternity. The air grew hot and thick, reeking of sulfur and something else, something ancient and indescribably foul. The whispers, now a cacophony of guttural pronouncements, pressed against my eardrums, threatening to shatter my sanity. I caught glimpses of the walls of the chasm as we fell, illuminated by pulsating veins of molten rock. The walls weren't rock, though. They were flesh. We landed with a bone-jarring thud on a soft, yielding surface. I opened my eyes, expecting to see fire and brimstone, the infernal landscape of my nightmares. Instead, I was met with something far more terrifying. We were in a vast, cavernous chamber, illuminated by an eerie bioluminescent glow that emanated from the walls. The walls pulsed rhythmically, like a gigantic heart. And covering every surface, stretching as far as the eye could see, was a network of pulsating veins and arteries, filled with a viscous, glowing fluid. We were inside something alive. The whispers were all around us now, deafening, overwhelming. They seemed to be emanating from the very walls themselves, from the pulsating flesh that surrounded us. And then, through the whispers, I heard another sound. A low, guttural growl that resonated deep within the earth, shaking the very foundations of our being. It was waking up. Part 7. The Whispering Bones. The tremors grew more frequent, the ground shivering like a frightened animal. The once familiar rumble had evolved into a deeper, more guttural growl, as though the earth itself was clearing its throat for some terrible pronouncement. We had retreated further into the abandoned mine, hoping the thick rock would offer some semblance of protection, a delusion, perhaps, but one we clung to fiercely. The Geiger counter clicked with manic intensity. The readings were off the charts, fluctuating wildly as though the very fabric of reality was fraying at the seams. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face pale and drawn, muttered calculations under her breath, her fingers trembling as she adjusted her glasses. "It's accelerating," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The energy output, it's unlike anything I've ever seen." Professor Caldwell, usually so stoic, had descended into a state of near catatonia, staring blankly at the rock face, his eyes wide and unseeing. He occasionally mumbled incoherently about ancient prophecies and forgotten gods, a chilling counterpoint to the incessant clicking of the Geiger counter. The whispers had started the night before. Faint, almost imperceptible, they slithered through the darkness, seeming to emanate from the rock itself. We initially dismissed them as the product of frayed nerves and exhaustion, but as the hours crept by, they grew stronger, more insistent. They weren't words, not exactly, but more like the rustling of dry leaves, the scraping of bone against stone, the echo of something ancient and malevolent. I tried to rationalize it. Shifting rock layers, trapped air pockets, the psychological effects of prolonged exposure to radiation, anything but the terrifying truth that seemed to claw at the edges of my sanity. The earth was speaking to us. And it wasn't saying anything comforting. That day, as the tremors intensified, the whispers took on a new dimension. A rhythmic pulsing thrummed through the rock, accompanied by a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate deep within our bones. It was a heartbeat, slow and ponderous, the heartbeat of a slumbering giant. Suddenly, Caldwell lurched to his feet, his eyes blazing with a manic intensity. "They're waking up," he croaked, his voice raspy and unfamiliar. "The whispers, they're calling them." He pointed a trembling finger towards the deepest recesses of the mine. "Down there," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic thrumming. "The gate. It's opening." We exchanged uneasy glances. The air grew thick with an almost palpable sense of dread. The Geiger counter screamed, its needle pinned in the red. The rhythmic pulsing intensified, the ground shaking violently beneath our feet. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of unease, we followed Caldwell deeper into the mine, our headlamps casting flickering beams into the oppressive darkness. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, more insistent. We passed strange formations of rock, twisted and contorted into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe in the flickering lamplight. The tunnel narrowed, forcing us to proceed single file. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of ozone and something else, something ancient and organic, like the inside of a tomb. The rhythmic pulsing reached a crescendo, the ground shaking so violently that we had to brace ourselves against the tunnel walls. Then we saw it. At the end of the tunnel, bathed in an eerie green glow, was a massive stone archway. It wasn't a natural formation, it was clearly carved, the intricate patterns pulsating with the same green light that seemed to emanate from within. The whispers reached a fever pitch, coalescing into a low, guttural chant that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. Caldwell stumbled towards the archway, his eyes fixed on the pulsing green light. "The gate," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. "It's opening." He reached out a trembling hand and touched the stone. The green light flared, engulfing him in a blinding flash. A wave of intense heat washed over us, followed by a deafening roar. The ground beneath our feet buckled, throwing us to the ground. When the light subsided, Caldwell was gone. The archway pulsed with a malevolent green glow, the whispers now a cacophony of inhuman voices. From within the archway, we heard a new sound, a sound that chilled us to the bone. A dry, rattling sound, like the clatter of bones. The Earth's core wasn't just a reactor. It was a prison, and the gate had just been opened. The tremors had become a constant, a low thrumming vibration like a giant's heartbeat against our feet. Sleep became a fragmented luxury, punctuated by jolts and the sickening crunch of shifting earth. The rhythmic booming from the depths, once a distant curiosity, was now a palpable presence, an auditory phantom limb that haunted our waking hours. We had moved our base of operations from the crumbling observatory to a reinforced section of the old subway tunnels. The claustrophobic confines offered a false sense of security, a flimsy shield against the inevitable. The air, filtered through jury-rigged systems, tasted of dust and fear. Dr. Ramirez, her face gaunt and shadowed, hadn't slept in days. She pored over the seismic readings, muttering to herself in a language that was half science, half prayer. The charts painted a horrifying picture. The pulses were growing stronger, more frequent. The reactor, whatever monstrous entity resided at the heart of our planet, was waking up. One evening, as the flickering fluorescent lights cast long, distorted shadows, Ramirez looked up, her eyes wide and haunted. "The harmonics," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They're changing." We huddled around her makeshift workstation, a collection of salvaged laptops and battered seismographs. On the screen, the jagged lines of the seismic readings were morphing, becoming more complex, more structured. "It's not random anymore," she continued, tracing the new patterns with a trembling finger. "There's a sequence, a language." The thought sent a chill down my spine. A language? What could the Earth's core possibly have to say? We spent the next few days trying to decipher the seismic language, a task as daunting as translating the whispers of ghosts. Ramirez, fueled by a desperate hope, worked tirelessly, comparing the patterns to known languages, to mathematical sequences, even to musical scores. Then, one night, a breakthrough. She had isolated a repeating sequence, a cluster of seismic spikes that resembled, in a distorted way, the structure of ancient Sumerian cuneiform. "My God," she breathed, her eyes reflecting the flickering screen light. "It's a warning." We gathered closer, our breaths held captive in our chests. Ramirez pointed to a series of symbols she had painstakingly translated. "It speaks of a cleansing," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the constant tremor. "A purification, a return to primordial state." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. What did a primordial state mean for the surface dwellers, for humanity? The answer, we feared, was nothing good. The tremors intensified. The rhythmic booming became a constant roar, a monstrous growl emanating from the depths. The air grew thick, charged with a strange, metallic tang. The lights in the tunnel flickered more violently, threatening to plunge us into darkness. Then, it began. A high-pitched whine, like the scream of tortured metal, cut through the rumbling. It grew in intensity, resonating with the very fabric of the tunnel, until it was almost unbearable. We clapped our hands over our ears, but the sound seemed to bypass our eardrums, vibrating directly within our skulls. The ground beneath us began to heave, the concrete walls groaning under immense pressure. Cracks spider-webbed across the ceiling, dust and debris raining down on us. The air grew hotter, stifling, thick with the smell of ozone. Then, the first one appeared. A shimmering, translucent tendril, the color of molten gold, snaked through a crack in the wall. It pulsed with an inner light, casting an eerie, ethereal glow on the terrified faces around me. It moved with an unnerving grace, exploring the confines of the tunnel like a curious serpent. More followed, pushing through the widening cracks, their unearthly light painting the tunnel in shades of gold and amber. They wriggled and pulsed, radiating an intense heat that made the air shimmer. Ramirez, her face ashen, pointed a trembling finger at the tendrils. "Energy conduits," she whispered, her voice strained. "They're drawing power." Drawing power for what? The question hung unanswered, a terrifying enigma in the face of the unfolding horror. The whine intensified, becoming a deafening shriek. The ground bucked violently, throwing us off our feet. The tendrils multiplied, intertwining, forming a shimmering, pulsating net around us. We were trapped, ensnared in the heart of a waking nightmare. The earth, our home, our protector, was turning against us. And the message from the core, the chilling warning whispered in the language of earthquakes, was finally clear. Humanity's time was running out. The cleansing had begun. Part 9. The Whispers of the Deep. The tremors had become a constant, a low-frequency hum vibrating through our bones. It wasn't just the earth moving. It felt like the planet itself was breathing, a slow, rasping inhalation that held the promise of something terrible. The crimson glow permeating the cracks in the earth had intensified, casting an infernal light that painted the night sky in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. Sleep became a luxury few could afford. The rhythmic shuddering of the earth, coupled with the unnerving glow and the echoing metallic groans from deep below, kept us in a perpetual state of unease. The scientific community, or what was left of it, was fractured. Some clung to the reactor theory, postulating wildly about ways to stabilize the core, a task as feasible as mending a broken star. Others, driven to the brink by fear and the mounting evidence, whispered of ancient prophecies and slumbering gods, their scientific reasoning crumbling under the weight of the inexplicable. The line between science and superstition had blurred, and the world teetered on the precipice of madness. My own sanity was fraying. The constant barrage of seismic activity, the relentless crimson glow, and the growing sense of impending doom had begun to chip away at my composure. I found myself staring at the glowing fissures, mesmerized by the pulsating light, listening for whispers in the wind that seemed to carry the echoes of a forgotten language. The animals had become even more erratic. Birds flew in disoriented circles, their panicked cries filling the air. Dogs howled incessantly at the empty sky, their eyes wide with terror. Even insects, normally oblivious to the larger world's woes, exhibited strange behaviors, swarming in chaotic patterns and emitting unnerving clicks and chirps. It felt as though the very fabric of nature was unraveling, the threads of life pulled taut by an unseen hand. One night, the tremors intensified. The ground bucked and swayed, throwing me off my feet. The crimson glow pulsed with a newfound intensity, painting the landscape in a strobing, nightmarish light. The metallic groans from the earth's depths grew louder, morphing into a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate within my skull. I crawled outside, the earth rolling beneath me like a ship caught in a storm. Around me, others stumbled from their homes, their faces etched with terror. Then, we heard it. A whisper. Not a whisper carried on the wind, but a whisper from within, a voice that seemed to resonate directly in our minds. It was a low, guttural sound, alien and ancient, speaking in a language we didn't understand, yet somehow, we knew. It spoke of power, of awakening, of a hunger that had lain dormant for eons. The whisper grew louder, weaving itself into the fabric of the tremors, the crimson glow, and the metallic groans. It was a symphony of dread, a chorus of the damned, heralding the arrival of something unimaginable. People began to scream, clutching their heads, their eyes wide with horror. Some babbled incoherently, while others fell to their knees, weeping and praying to gods they had long forgotten. The whisper invaded our thoughts, our dreams, our very being. It was a parasitic consciousness, burrowing its way into our minds, feeding on our fear. I stumbled back inside, slamming the door against the cacophony of screams and whispers. I covered my ears, but the voice was inside me now, a part of me. It whispered of the reactor, of its true purpose, of the entity it had been designed to contain. It spoke of a time before time, of a world ruled by beings of unimaginable power, beings who had built the reactor not as a source of energy, but as a prison. And now, the prison was breaking. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, the voice weaving a tapestry of terror in my mind. It showed me images, flashes of a world consumed by fire and shadow, a world ruled by monstrous entities that defied comprehension. I saw towering figures made of molten rock and shadow, their eyes burning with an unholy light. I saw cities crumble and oceans boil, the very air thick with the stench of death. The voice promised power, unimaginable power, if I would only submit, if I would only embrace the coming darkness. It offered me a place at the side of the ancient ones, a place of power and dominion in the new world order. I fought against the whispers, clinging to the remnants of my sanity. I knew that if I succumbed, I would be lost, consumed by the darkness that was rising from the earth's core. But the voice was relentless, its whispers a seductive siren song, promising an escape from the terror, an embrace of the inevitable. The earth groaned, a deep, agonizing sound that reverberated through my bones. The crimson glow intensified, bathing the room in a hellish light. The whispers reached a crescendo, filling my mind, drowning out all other thoughts. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face, the voice echoing in my skull. "Embrace the darkness," it whispered. "Become one with us." And in that moment, I felt a part of me surrender. To be continued? Part 10. The whispers grow louder. The tremors had become a constant, a low-frequency hum vibrating through the very bones of the world. Sleep was a luxury now, replaced by fitful dozing punctuated by the unsettling sensation of the ground shifting beneath us. The rhythmic pulsing, once barely perceptible, now throbbed with a sickening regularity, like a giant, diseased heart struggling to beat. The birds, those fragile barometers of nature's well-being, had fallen silent. Even the crows, those harbingers of doom, seemed to have deserted us, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. The silence was almost worse than the tremors. It amplified the feeling of isolation, the sense that we were stranded on a dying planet, abandoned by everything that once called it home. The reports from the remaining seismic monitoring stations painted a grim picture. The core's pulsations were intensifying, becoming more erratic. The scientists, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination, spoke of harmonic resonances, of the Earth's crust vibrating like a struck bell. They predicted escalating seismic activity, volcanic eruptions of unprecedented scale, and, most chillingly, unpredictable shifts in the magnetic poles. The whispers, too, had grown louder. They were no longer confined to the moments of extreme stress or fatigue. Now, they were a constant presence, a low, insidious murmur at the edge of hearing. They slithered into my waking thoughts, insinuating themselves into my dreams, twisting familiar sounds into distorted parodies. The hum of the refrigerator became a guttural growl, the creak of the floorboards a whispered threat. I tried to rationalize it, to attribute it to stress, to sleep deprivation. But deep down, a primal fear gnawed at me. The whispers felt intentional, like something was trying to communicate, something vast and ancient and malevolent, stirring in the depths of the earth. Dr. R.S. Thorne, the lead geophysicist, had become increasingly withdrawn, his eyes haunted by a knowledge he couldn't share. He spent hours poring over seismic data, muttering to himself in a language I didn't understand. One evening, I found him in the observation room, staring at the flickering screens with an expression of abject terror. "It's changing," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the constant thrum of the earth. "The signal, it's evolving." I approached him cautiously. "What do you mean, evolving?" He turned to me, his eyes wide and unfocused. "It's structured. There's a pattern now. It's not just random pulses anymore." "A pattern? Like what?" He shook his head, his face pale and drawn. "I don't know. It's complex. Almost linguistic." Linguistic? The word sent a chill down my spine. The whispers, could they be more than just hallucinations? Could they be a form of communication, emanating from the very heart of the planet? That night, the tremors intensified. The ground shook with such violence that I was thrown from my bed. The emergency lights flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. The whispers, now a cacophony of distorted voices, filled my ears, drowning out all other sounds. I stumbled out of my room and into the corridor, where I found other members of the research team huddled together, their faces masks of terror. The building groaned and creaked around us, threatening to collapse. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. The only illumination came from the flickering glow of the emergency exit signs and the eerie green luminescence that seemed to emanate from the cracks in the walls. The green light pulsed in time with the tremors, growing brighter with each pulse. Then, from the depths of the earth, came a sound unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was a low, resonant hum, laced with an almost melodic quality, like the chanting of 1,000 unseen voices. It resonated through the building, vibrating through our bones, filling the air with a palpable sense of dread. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single, coherent voice. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, I knew its meaning. It was a warning, and a promise. The earth was awakening, and it was hungry. The green light intensified, flooding the corridor with an unnatural glow. The walls began to bulge and crack, revealing more of the pulsating green substance beneath. It writhed and pulsed, like living tissue, reaching out towards us with glistening tendrils. The voice in my head grew louder, more insistent. It spoke of ancient power, of a slumbering god, of a world reborn in fire and shadow. It promised power, knowledge, transcendence. All I had to do was surrender. I closed my eyes, my mind reeling. The earth trembled beneath my feet, the green light burned into my retinas. The voice whispered promises of a new world, a world ruled by the ancient power that dwelled at the heart of the planet. And for a terrifying moment, I almost listened. The vibrations intensified, rattling the bones in my chest. The rhythmic thumping now had a counterpoint, a high-pitched whine that seemed to burrow into my skull, setting my teeth on edge. We were huddled in the relative safety of the reinforced bunker beneath the Icelandic research station, but safe felt like a cruel joke. The very ground beneath us seemed to be dissolving into chaos. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face etched with a grim determination, was hunched over a makeshift seismograph cobbled together from salvaged equipment. The needle danced frantically, tracing a pattern of escalating instability. "It's accelerating," she said, her voice barely a whisper above the grinding, metallic shriek emanating from the earth. "The pulsations are getting stronger, more frequent." "What does it mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. I could feel the dread, thick and suffocating, clinging to me like a shroud. "It means," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a chilling intensity, "that the core is destabilizing. The reactor, it's reaching critical mass." We exchanged a look of horrified understanding. The implications were catastrophic. The core, the very heart of our planet, the ancient reactor that had unknowingly sustained life for eons, was on the verge of meltdown. The tremors intensified, throwing us off balance. Dust rained down from the ceiling, the concrete groaning under unimaginable pressure. A deep, guttural roar echoed from the depths, a sound that seemed to defy the laws of physics, a sound that resonated not just in our ears, but in the very marrow of our bones. It was the sound of the earth screaming. The whine reached a fever pitch, morphing into a deafening screech. The lights flickered, then died, plunging us into darkness. The emergency lights kicked in, casting eerie, elongated shadows that danced across the frightened faces of the surviving researchers. Then, something truly terrifying happened. The tremors stopped. The screeching ceased. A profound silence descended, broken only by our ragged breaths. It was the silence of the grave, the silence before the storm. Anya's face was ashen. "This isn't good," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is the quiet, before the rupture." Minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence, so profound, so absolute, was more terrifying than the cacophony that preceded it. We waited, suspended in a state of agonizing anticipation, bracing for the inevitable. Suddenly, the ground lurched violently. We were thrown against the walls like rag dolls. A crack appeared in the concrete ceiling, spider webbing outwards with frightening speed. The air grew heavy, thick with the metallic tang of ozone. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, almost imperceptible, they seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the air itself. They swirled around us, growing louder, more insistent, a chorus of disembodied voices whispering in a language we didn't understand, yet somehow, instinctively, knew. They were the whispers of the old ones. The ancient entities that had slumbered for eons within the Earth's core, sustained by the reactor's energy. The entities whose existence we had foolishly dismissed as myth. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a chilling chant. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of malevolence that pressed down on us, stealing our breath, paralyzing us with fear. The ground beneath us began to glow, a sickly, pulsating green light seeping through the cracks in the concrete. The light intensified, revealing strange, shifting patterns on the walls, hieroglyphs that seemed to writhe and pulsate with an unnatural life. Anya, her eyes wide with terror, pointed a trembling finger at the largest crack in the ceiling. Emerging from the glowing fissure, slowly, deliberately, was a tendril. Not a tendril of plant life, but something else. Something black and glistening, pulsating with the same unnatural green light, covered in what appeared to be eyes. Hundreds of tiny, unblinking eyes. The tendril snaked down, probing the air, as if tasting it. Then, another emerged, and another, until the ceiling was a writhing mass of black, glistening tentacles, each covered in those unnerving, watchful eyes. The whispers intensified, morphing into a cacophony of guttural chants and shrieks. The room pulsed with the sickly green light, bathing us in its unearthly glow. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and something else, something ancient, something alien. We were trapped, cornered, with no escape. The old ones were awakening, and the earth, our once benevolent mother, was becoming their birthing chamber. The whispers promised pain, promised oblivion, promised a new world order, one ruled not by man, but by the ancient entities that had slumbered for eons beneath our feet. And as one of the tentacles reached out, its countless eyes fixated on me, I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the whispers were not just a threat. They were a promise. Part 12. The Whispering Sickness. The humming intensified. It no longer felt like a sound vibrating through the earth, but a pressure inside our skulls, squeezing, pushing. The headaches, which had become our constant companion, now throbbed in time with the unseen pulse. Sleep offered no escape, only fragmented nightmares of glowing fissures and whispering voices. Dr. Ramirez, gaunt and hollow-eyed, declared the phenomenon, the whispering sickness. It wasn't just the physical symptoms, people were exhibiting strange psychological changes. Increased irritability and paranoia were common, but more disturbing were the reports of auditory hallucinations. A low, incessant whispering, only audible at the edge of hearing, was driving some to the brink of madness. "It's the reactor," Anya stated flatly during one of our increasingly strained meetings. Her usual fire had been replaced by a chilling calmness, her eyes holding a distant, almost vacant expression. "It's communicating." "Communicating?" I asked, my voice hoarse. The whispering had started for me the night before, a sibilant murmur just beneath the threshold of conscious sound. "Not in a way we can understand," she said, running a hand through her tangled hair. "More impressionistic. Feelings, dread, expectation." The global situation continued to deteriorate. The magnetic field fluctuations were wreaking havoc on communication systems. Planes were grounded, ships lost at sea. The erratic weather patterns had intensified, unleashing unpredictable storms and devastating floods. The world, it seemed, was unraveling at the seams. One evening, while reviewing seismic data, I noticed something unusual. A distinct pattern was emerging amidst the chaotic tremors. It wasn't natural. It was too regular, too organized. I enlarged the waveform on the monitor, my heart pounding in my chest. The pattern resembled a series of pulses, almost like a code. "Anya," I called out, my voice trembling. She came over, her eyes widening as she saw the display. "It's sending something," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the low hum that now permeated everything. We worked tirelessly, trying to decipher the code. Days blurred into nights, fueled by caffeine and a growing sense of dread. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way into our thoughts, our dreams. It spoke of change, of transformation, of a coming power unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we cracked a small piece of the code. It translated to a single word: arise. The implications were terrifying. What was arising? What had the reactor awakened deep within the Earth? The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. Governments, now fully aware of the impending crisis, scrambled to prepare, though what they could possibly do against a force emanating from the planet's core was beyond comprehension. The whispering sickness spread like wildfire, affecting millions. Hospitals were overflowing with patients suffering from psychosis, seizures, and inexplicable physical ailments. Then, it happened. It started subtly, a faint tremor that quickly escalated into a violent earthquake unlike anything ever recorded. The ground buckled and heaved, buildings crumbled, and the air filled with the screams of the dying. But the earthquake was just the prelude. As the earth convulsed, fissures began to open, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. From these fissures, a strange, luminescent mist began to pour out, spreading across the land like a living shroud. The whispering intensified, becoming a deafening roar, and within the mist, we saw them. Shapes. Figures. Not human, not animal, but something else. They emerged from the fissures, their forms shifting and shimmering within the glowing mist. They were the embodiment of the nightmares that had plagued our sleep, the whispers that had haunted our waking hours. The world had descended into chaos. The ancient reactor at the heart of our planet had awakened, and it had brought with it something truly horrific. The whispers had promised a rising. Now, we saw what had arisen. And it was not of this world. I watched in horror as one of the figures, a towering, amorphous shape with glowing red eyes, drifted towards a group of survivors. They screamed, trying to flee, but it was too late. The figure enveloped them in the glowing mist, and their screams were abruptly cut short. Anya stood beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. The whispering was deafening now, a cacophony of voices echoing in our minds. What are they? She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I shook my head, unable to speak. I didn't know what they were, but I knew one thing. Humanity's time was running out. The Earth, our home, had become a breeding ground for something ancient and terrifying, something that had been slumbering for eons within the heart of our planet. And now, it was awake. The whispering promised change. It was delivering on its promise. The whispering promised power. It was about to claim it all. Part 13. The Whispers of the Deep. The tremors hadn't stopped. They weren't the violent, city-toppling earthquakes of before, but a constant, unsettling shudder, like the earth had a fever and was shivering uncontrollably. It made sleep impossible, turning every moment into a strained vigil. The rhythmic thrumming, felt more than heard, vibrated up from the planet's depths, a morbid heartbeat counting down to an unknown catastrophe. The scientific community, what was left of it, was fractured. Some clung to the hope that the reactor was stabilizing, the tremors a sign of it settling into a new, less destructive equilibrium. Others, including Dr. Aris Thorne, argued that it was a prelude to something far worse. He'd become a gaunt, haunted figure, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights spent poring over seismic data. He saw patterns in the tremors, a sinister symphony building to a terrifying crescendo. The psychological impact was even more devastating. The constant tremors had frayed the nerves of the survivors. Paranoia was rampant. Whispers and rumors, spread like wildfire through the fractured communication networks, told of mutated creatures emerging from the depths, of glowing fissures opening in the earth, swallowing entire villages. Most were dismissed as hysteria, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Every shadow seemed to hold a lurking horror, every unfamiliar sound a harbinger of doom. One recurring rumor spoke of the whispers. Supposedly, if you listened closely enough during the lulls between tremors, you could hear a faint, almost sub-audible whispering coming from the ground. Most dismissed it as tinnitus or the wind whistling through shattered buildings. But Aris had heard it. He'd first noticed it in the dead of night, a faint, sibilant murmur beneath the rhythmic thrumming. He'd initially dismissed it as his imagination, a product of stress and exhaustion. But the whispering persisted, growing louder, more insistent, weaving its way into his dreams, filling them with unsettling, incomprehensible imagery. Driven by a morbid curiosity, Aris began recording the whispers. He used highly sensitive seismic equipment, normally used to detect minute Earth movements, to amplify the sounds coming from the deep. What he heard chilled him to the bone. It wasn't random noise. It was structured, patterned, almost linguistic. He spent days analyzing the recordings, filtering out the background noise, isolating the whispers. He tried every known language, every known code, but nothing matched. Then he remembered the glyphs. The strange, alien symbols found etched on the fragments of the unknown metal retrieved from the Kola superdeep borehole. He'd dismissed them as meaningless markings, but now, he pulled up the images on his battered laptop, comparing them to the spectrographic analysis of the whispers. His breath caught in his throat. There was a correlation. The peaks and troughs of the sound waves seemed to mimic the intricate shapes of the glyphs. Could it be a language? A language from the core? The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. If he could decipher the whispers, he might be able to understand what was happening, perhaps even find a way to stop it. But as he delved deeper, a creeping dread began to consume him. He realized the whispers weren't random. They were directed, focused. He began to suspect they were directed at him. He started hearing them even without the equipment. Faint, insidious whispers that seemed to emanate from the very air he breathed, weaving themselves into his thoughts, his dreams. He tried to block them out, to rationalize them away, but they were relentless, burrowing deeper into his psyche. One night, during a particularly violent tremor, he heard the whispers clearly for the first time. They spoke in a language he didn't understand, yet somehow, he understood. They spoke of power, of a vast, ancient intelligence awakening from its eons-long slumber. They spoke of a world reborn in fire and shadow. And they spoke of him, Aris Thorn, as a vessel. He recoiled in horror, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. The reactor wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was conscious, aware, and it was communicating with him, choosing him. He stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, the whispers echoing in his mind. He wanted to scream, to run, to escape the suffocating dread that had enveloped him. But he couldn't. He was paralyzed, trapped in the grip of an unseen force, a puppet dangling from invisible strings. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling his mind with visions of a world transformed. A world consumed by the power of the core. He saw cities crumble, continents shift, the very fabric of reality unraveling. And at the heart of it all, he saw himself, a conduit for the ancient, unimaginable power that slumbered beneath the Earth's crust. He closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face, the whispers echoing in his skull. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he was no longer in control. He was a prisoner of the deep, a vessel for the whispers. And the Earth's final act had begun. Part 14. The Whispering Sickness. The tremors had become our constant companions, a shivering pulse beneath our feet, a reminder of the churning monstrosity below. The city, once a symbol of human ingenuity, now resembled a fractured skull, buildings leaning precariously against each other like broken teeth. The air, thick with ash and the metallic tang of something else, something indefinable yet sickening, rasped in our lungs with each shallow breath. The whispering had intensified, no longer a distant murmur but a constant, sibilant drone that seemed to emanate from the very ground, from the walls, from within ourselves. It wasn't a language we recognized, not human, not animal, but a pulsating stream of clicks, hisses, and guttural murmurs. It wormed its way into our dreams, twisting them into grotesque parodies of reality. People began to exhibit strange behaviors, their eyes glazed over, muttering incoherent phrases in response to the unseen whispers. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face etched with a weary desperation, believed the whispers were a form of psychic radiation, a byproduct of the reactor's awakening. It's changing us, she rasped during one of our dwindling supply runs. Altering our brainwaves, reshaping our perceptions. The reactor isn't just physical, it's conscious. Her theory, as outlandish as it sounded, was horrifyingly plausible. The whispers seemed to prey on our fears, amplifying our anxieties until they blossomed into full-blown paranoia. Trust evaporated, replaced by suspicion and hostility. Arguments erupted over dwindling rations, over the smallest perceived slights. The whispers fueled the flames of our disintegration. One night, a scream ripped through the oppressive silence. We scrambled towards the source, flashlights cutting through the pervasive gloom. We found Mrs. Henderson, one of the older survivors, writhing on the floor, her eyes wide with terror, her body contorting in unnatural ways. Black veins, pulsing with an internal light, spider-webbed across her skin. The whispers, "They're inside me," she shrieked, her voice a garbled rasp. "They're changing me." Before anyone could react, her body convulsed violently, her back arching impossibly. A sickening crack echoed through the room as her bones seemed to reshape themselves beneath her skin. Her screams intensified, morphing into a series of guttural clicks and hisses, the very sounds of the whispers themselves. Then, silence. When we dared to approach, we found Mrs. Henderson still, her body twisted into a grotesque parody of human form. Her eyes, still wide open, stared blankly at the ceiling, reflecting the flickering light of our flashlights like polished obsidian. The black veins, now dull and lifeless, crisscrossed her skin like morbid tattoos. The whispers seemed to intensify after that, a mocking chorus celebrating their victory. The fear in the camp escalated to a fever pitch. We were no longer just survivors, we were prey, trapped in a macabre experiment orchestrated by the ancient reactor at the heart of our world. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind, every distant rumble, was interpreted as the harbinger of another transformation. We watched each other with a mixture of fear and suspicion, wondering who would be next. One by one, the whispers claimed their victims. The transformations became more rapid, more grotesque. Some developed chitinous exoskeletons, their limbs becoming elongated and segmented. Others grew extra appendages, their skin taking on a sickly, bioluminescent glow. They spoke in the clicking, hissing language of the whispers, their humanity erased, replaced by something other. The whispers were no longer an external force, they were within us, an insidious infection spreading through our minds, reshaping our bodies. We were becoming part of the reactor's design, cogs in its unimaginable machinery. The Earth itself seemed to be groaning under the weight of its awakening, the tremors becoming more violent, the air thicker with the metallic tang of transformation. I looked at Anya, her face gaunt and pale, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the dying embers of our fire. The whispers swirled around us, a cacophony of alien sounds. I could see the fear in her eyes, the resignation, the understanding that we were fighting a losing battle. The reactor was winning, and we were becoming it. We were becoming the whispers. Part 15. The whispers grow louder. The humming was worse. Not louder, precisely, but denser. It permeated everything now, a low, thrumming vibration that resonated in your bones and teeth. Sleep offered no escape. Dreams were plagued by shifting geometric shapes and the echoing drone, making true rest impossible. The collective exhaustion within the bunker was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from fear and sleep deprivation. Dr. Anya Sharma, the team's geologist, had become fixated on the seismic readings. Her eyes, bloodshot and wild, darted between screens displaying a chaotic symphony of tremors. The Earth wasn't just shuddering anymore, it was convulsing. New fissures, thin and jagged, snaked across the bunker's concrete walls, weeping a viscous, black ooze. Its metallic tang hung heavy in the air, another insidious layer added to the growing unease. "The frequency, it's changing," Anya mumbled, her voice hoarse. She traced the jagged lines on the seismograph with a trembling finger. "It's becoming patterned." "Patterned? What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The constant hum had begun to affect my speech, slurring my words together. Anya didn't answer, she just stared at the screen, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, she pointed a shaky finger at a specific cluster of seismic readings. These aren't natural. They're too regular, too deliberate." Professor Moreau, looking more gaunt and pale than ever, shuffled closer. He peered over Anya's shoulder, his cloudy eyes scanning the data. After a long, unsettling silence, he let out a low, guttural sound, something between a sigh and a groan. "It's communicating," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the incessant hum. "Communicating? With what?" I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. Moreau turned to me, his gaze vacant and distant. "With it. The reactor. The entity." The idea was so preposterous, so utterly terrifying, that I almost laughed. But the look in Moreau's eyes, the utter conviction in his voice, stopped the laughter in my throat. He believed it. He truly believed that the core of the Earth, this ancient, monstrous reactor, was communicating. The black ooze continued to seep from the cracks in the walls, its metallic smell growing stronger. The hum intensified, vibrating the very air around us. And then, we heard it. A whisper. Faint at first, barely distinguishable from the hum, it slithered into our ears. A chilling counterpoint to the deep, resonating drone. It wasn't a human voice, not exactly. It was more like a chorus of 1,000 whispers, overlapping and intertwining, a cacophony of sibilant sounds that seemed to burrow into our brains. Panic erupted in the bunker. Several of the researchers began to scream, clawing at their ears, trying to block out the insidious whispers. Others simply stood frozen, their eyes wide with terror, as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Anya, however, remained transfixed by the seismic readings. Her eyes, now almost completely black with exhaustion and terror, were locked onto the screen, tracking the increasingly complex patterns of the tremors. She began to mutter to herself, her words a strange mixture of geological jargon and something else, something ancient. It's showing us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's showing us the way in." "The way in? The way into what?" I asked, my own voice shaking uncontrollably. Anya turned to me, her face illuminated by the flickering light of the monitors. A strange, almost beatific smile spread across her lips. "The way in, to the heart of the Earth," she whispered. "The way, to the source." The whispers intensified, filling the bunker with their chilling chorus. The humming resonated deep within our bones, a physical manifestation of the Earth's growing unrest. The black ooze flowed freely now, forming dark, glistening pools on the floor. And in the heart of the chaos, Anya Sharma, our geologist, stood bathed in the eerie light of the monitors, her eyes shining with a terrifying, otherworldly light. We were trapped, not only in a crumbling bunker miles beneath the surface, but also in the grip of something far older, far more powerful, than any of us could have possibly imagined. And the whispers, growing ever louder, promised only one thing: oblivion. Part 16. The Whispers of Decay. The tremors had become our constant companions, a rhythmic shuddering of the earth, a morbid heartbeat counting down to some unknown catastrophe. The sun, a sickly, jaundiced smear in the sky, offered no warmth, only a pallid light that cast long, distorted shadows. We had abandoned the ravaged city weeks ago, our dwindling group a ragged caravan of despair, clinging to the faint hope of finding sanctuary in the less affected northern regions. But even there, the whispers followed us. I hadn't slept properly in what felt like an eternity. The whispers, a low, guttural humming, permeated everything, weaving themselves into the fabric of reality. They seemed to emanate from the earth itself, a chorus of dying breaths exhaled by the planet. At first, I thought it was the stress, the constant fear, playing tricks on my mind. But others heard it too. Dr. Anya Sharma, our resident geologist, whose once sharp eyes now held a haunted, distant look, confirmed my fears. The humming was real, a byproduct of the core's instability. We had lost another one the night before, young Thomas, barely 18. He had wandered off in the delirium brought on by the constant vibrations, drawn by the whispers like a moth to a flickering, deadly flame. We found him the next morning, a grotesque parody of a human being, his skin gray and stretched taut over his bones, his eyes vacant black pits. The earth beneath him was scorched black, the very air shimmering with residual energy. We buried him quickly, a shallow grave in the poisoned earth, a silent testament to our impending doom. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to burrow into our brains, whispering promises of oblivion, of a release from the slow, agonizing decay that was consuming the world. They spoke of ancient powers, of a slumbering entity deep within the earth, stirred from its eons-long sleep by our meddling. Anya had become obsessed with deciphering the whispers. She spent her days hunched over her seismograph, its needle dancing frantically across the paper, a chaotic EKG of a dying planet. She muttered to herself, her words a strange mixture of scientific jargon and ancient Sumerian incantations she'd gleaned from a tattered, leather-bound book she carried everywhere. The book, she claimed, held the key to understanding the core, to understanding the entity within. "It's communicating," she'd rasp, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep and water. "It's trying to tell us something." "What is it saying, Anya?" I'd ask, my voice a strained whisper. She'd look up, her eyes wide and unseeing, and repeat the same phrase, over and over again, like a broken record. "Azathoth awakens. Azathoth awakens." The name sent shivers down my spine. It sounded ancient, powerful, and utterly malevolent. Our supplies dwindled. The canned food was running low, the water purifiers struggling to cope with the increasingly contaminated water sources. The landscape was changing, morphing into something alien and hostile. Strange, bioluminescent fungi sprouted in the decaying forests, casting an eerie, green glow over the landscape. Twisted, skeletal trees clawed at the poisoned sky, their branches adorned with pulsating, fleshy pods that emitted a sickeningly sweet smell. The animals, the few that remained, had become monstrous. Their bodies distorted, their eyes glowing with the same unnatural green light as the fungi. They stalked us in the shadows, drawn by the whispers, their mutated forms a grotesque mockery of nature. One evening, as we huddled around a dying fire, the whispers intensified. They became a cacophony of voices, a chorus of screams and moans that seemed to tear at the very edges of sanity. The earth beneath us trembled violently, cracks appearing in the parched ground. Anya stood up, her eyes blazing with an unnatural light. She clutched the ancient book to her chest, her lips moving silently. She walked towards one of the widening fissures in the ground, a beatific smile spreading across her face. "It calls to me," she whispered, her voice strangely amplified, resonating with the whispers emanating from the earth. "It promises peace, an end to the suffering." We tried to stop her, but it was too late. She stepped into the fissure, the earth closing around her like a hungry maw. The whispers subsided, replaced by a chilling silence that was even more terrifying. We were alone, abandoned on a dying planet, with a slumbering god awakening beneath our feet. The ancient book lay open on the ground where Anya had dropped it. The last page, illuminated by the flickering firelight, depicted a monstrous entity, a swirling vortex of tentacles and eyes, surrounded by a chorus of worshipping figures. Beneath the image, a single inscription, written in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. "Azathoth dreams. When Azathoth wakes, all shall be consumed." The silence was broken by a low rumble, deep within the earth. The rumble grew louder, closer, until it felt like the very planet was about to split apart. We looked at each other, our faces pale in the firelight, knowing that the end was near. The whispers had stopped. Now, only the screams remained. The tremors intensified, becoming a constant shuddering, as if the earth itself was shivering with a fever dream. The reddish glow in the sky pulsed, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced and writhed across the ravaged landscape. The air, thick with the metallic tang of ionized particles, crackled with an unseen energy. We huddled in the ruined observatory, our dwindling supplies reflecting the dim light, each of us a stark island in a sea of growing dread. Professor Armitage, once a beacon of intellectual curiosity, was now a hollow shell, muttering incoherent equations and staring at the pulsing sky with a haunted look. His earlier manic energy had been replaced by a quiet resignation, a terrifying acceptance of the inevitable. His ramblings, though nonsensical at times, hinted at a horrifying truth. The reactor at the Earth's core wasn't simply failing, it was changing. Sarah, the geologist, tried to maintain a semblance of order, rationing our remaining water and attempting to decipher the seismic readings from the jury-rigged equipment. Her face, etched with exhaustion and fear, reflected the stark reality of our situation. The tremors were increasing in frequency and intensity, suggesting massive shifts deep within the Earth. The planet was not just shuddering, it was rearranging itself. The core, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rumbling, it's migrating. The energy signature, it's shifting. Becoming something else. That something else hung over us, a silent, terrifying question mark. The once familiar rhythm of the tremors had become erratic, punctuated by sharp, jarring jolts that sent debris raining down from the observatory's cracked ceiling. The reddish glow in the sky intensified, transforming the night into a macabre twilight, painting the world in hues of blood orange and sickly green. I found myself drawn to the mangled telescope, its lens cracked and useless, pointing towards the pulsating heart of the apocalypse. Through the fractured lens, the sky seemed to writhe, the colors shifting and swirling in a hypnotic dance. Then I saw it, a flicker, a brief, almost imperceptible shimmer in the crimson sky. It wasn't the pulsing of the ionized air, nor the shifting of the aurora. This was something different, something structured. I pointed, my hand trembling. There, do you see it? Sarah and Armitage joined me, their faces pale and drawn. The flicker reappeared, brighter this time, a fleeting glimpse of geometric shapes against the backdrop of the pulsating sky. It was too fleeting to discern any detail, but it was undeniably there. Something was emerging from the heart of the chaos. The tremors intensified again, a violent shudder that sent us sprawling. A deep groan resonated through the earth, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very core of the planet, a sound that spoke of immense pressure and unimaginable power. When the tremors subsided, the flicker in the sky had solidified. No longer a fleeting glimpse, it now hung suspended in the crimson air, a vast, complex structure of interlocking geometric shapes, shimmering with an otherworldly light. It pulsed in sync with the Earth's tremors, each pulse accompanied by a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the very bones of the observatory. Armitage, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe, began to chant in a language none of us recognized, his voice a high-pitched, keening wail. He pointed towards the structure, his finger trembling. The architects, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the humming. They have awakened. Sarah and I exchanged a look of pure horror. Armitage's ramblings had always bordered on the delusional, but this was different. There was a conviction in his voice, a terrifying certainty that chilled us to the core. The structure in the sky continued to grow, its intricate geometric patterns becoming more defined, its shimmering light intensifying. It no longer looked like a random collection of shapes. It now resembled a vast, intricate machine, a cosmic clockwork mechanism of unimaginable scale. The humming intensified, resonating through the earth, through the air, through us. It was a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly within our skulls. A sound that spoke of ancient power, of cosmic indifference, of an awakening that promised nothing but oblivion. As the structure pulsed, the reddish glow in the sky began to recede, revealing a clear patch of night sky behind it. And in that patch of sky, we saw them. Stars. Not the familiar stars of our galaxy, but something different. They were larger, brighter, and pulsed with an unsettling, rhythmic light. They were arranged in patterns unlike any constellation we had ever seen, patterns that seemed to mirror the geometric shapes of the structure in the sky. These were not the stars of our universe. They were the stars of somewhere else. Somewhere beyond. The humming reached a crescendo, and the ground beneath us began to crack. The observatory, our last refuge, began to crumble around us. As the walls collapsed, I looked up at the structure, at the alien stars beyond, and a single, terrifying thought echoed in my mind. The Earth wasn't dying. It was being transformed. It was becoming a gateway. A gateway to somewhere else. Somewhere horrific. And we were trapped inside, about to be taken along for the ride. The tremors had become a constant, a low-frequency hum vibrating through our bones, a morbid lullaby to the dying world. The sky, perpetually stained a sickly ochre, pulsed with the strange luminescence that had become our sun. It offered no warmth, only an unnerving, diffuse light that cast long, skeletal shadows even at midday. We had abandoned the seismic monitoring station days ago. It had become a tomb, its readings spiraling into the meaningless infinity of overloaded sensors. The ground itself seemed to breathe, rising and falling in slow, sickening waves. Fissures, glowing with internal heat, snaked across the landscape, swallowing homes and highways in their fiery maw. We were nomads now, a dwindling band scavenging for supplies in the skeletal remains of civilization. Sarah, our geologist, was gone, swallowed by one of those infernal cracks in the earth during a particularly violent tremor. We hadn't even had time to scream. One moment she was there, her face illuminated by the hellish glow, the next, nothing. Just the gaping, incandescent maw of the earth. The memory haunted me, a constant reminder of our fragile existence. We had found refuge in the dilapidated shell of a supermarket, its shelves mostly bare, stripped clean by previous survivors or consumed by the creeping rot that permeated everything. The air hung thick with the smell of decay and the metallic tang of ozone. We huddled together, 5 shadows in the oppressive gloom, the silence broken only by the rhythmic rumble of the earth and the rasping breaths of Old Man Hemlock. He was dying, slowly and painfully, his lungs choked with the strange, phosphorescent dust that had begun to fall from the sky like a perverse, radioactive snow. Each breath was a struggle, a symphony of wheezes and rattling coughs. He looked at us, his eyes wide and vacant, reflecting the unnatural glow of the sky. "It's the whispers," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper above the earth's groan. "They're getting louder." We exchanged uneasy glances. Hemlock had been rambling about whispers for days, incoherent mutterings about voices from the earth. We had dismissed it as delirium, the fevered ramblings of a dying man. But now, in the suffocating silence of the ruined supermarket, I thought I heard it too. A low, resonant thrumming, not quite a sound, but more a vibration that resonated deep within my skull. "It's the reactor," Daniel, our physicist, murmured, his voice strained. He was staring at a crude map he had drawn on the dusty floor, a network of lines connecting the epicenters of the increasing tremors. "The core, it's destabilizing. The whispers, they're a form of energy release, some kind of resonance." "Energy release?" I repeated, my voice laced with fear. "What does that mean?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a chilling resignation. "It means the reactor is about to go critical." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air, a suffocating blanket of dread. Critical mass. The Earth itself becoming a nuclear bomb. That night, the whispers intensified. They were no longer a faint thrumming, but a distinct, pulsing drone that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath us. The earth trembled violently, the tremors escalating into full-blown earthquakes. Cracks spread across the supermarket walls, the ceiling groaning under the strain. We huddled together, paralyzed by fear, as the world outside disintegrated around us. The phosphorescent dust fell thicker now, coating everything in a ghostly luminescence. The air grew heavy, charged with static electricity, making the hairs on our arms stand on end. Suddenly, Hemlock sat bolt upright, his eyes wide with a terrifying clarity. He pointed a trembling finger towards the cracked ceiling, a look of pure horror etched on his face. They're coming," he gasped, his voice raspy and weak. From below?" He collapsed back onto the floor, his body convulsing. The whispers reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled our heads, drowning out all other sounds. The ground beneath us buckled, the supermarket floor splitting open, revealing a gaping chasm filled with a blinding, white light. From the depths of that infernal chasm, something began to emerge. Not the molten rock and fire we expected, but something else, something alive. Tentacles, thick as tree trunks and glowing with the same infernal light as the chasm, writhed and pulsed, reaching towards us, dripping with a viscous, phosphorescent slime. Their surfaces were covered in pulsating veins, like the capillaries of some monstrous, subterranean heart. And at the tips of those tentacles, where suckers should have been, were eyes. Hundreds of them, blinking and swiveling, fixing us with their cold, alien gaze. The whispers intensified, becoming a chorus of screeches and howls that seemed to tear at our sanity. The creatures, whatever they were, pulled themselves out of the chasm, their bodies vast and amorphous, shimmering with the same unnatural luminescence that now bathed the world. We scrambled back, our screams lost in the cacophony of the earth's death throes. The creatures advanced, their tentacles slithering across the floor, their eyes fixed on us, radiating an ancient, malevolent intelligence. The reactor had gone critical, and the Earth had given birth. The tremors had become a constant, a low-frequency hum beneath our feet, a rhythmic palpitation of the dying planet. The sky, perpetually stained a bruised violet, pulsed with an unnerving luminescence. Inside the bunker, the air hung thick and sour with the metallic tang of fear. We were trapped, not just underground, but in a slow, agonizing countdown. Dr. Aris, his face a mask of grim determination etched with new lines of exhaustion, huddled over the seismograph, its needle dancing a frantic jig across the paper. The rhythmic spikes were growing taller, closer together. The reactor, whatever monstrous thing pulsed at the heart of our world, was reaching critical mass. "It's accelerating," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The energy output, it's beyond anything we've ever recorded." We all understood what he wasn't saying. The end was closer than we thought. The pretense of escape, the futile hope of finding a solution, had evaporated, leaving a stark, chilling reality. Maria, who had been remarkably stoic throughout the ordeal, finally broke. She clutched her rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer, tears streaming down her face. The rhythmic chanting, once a source of comfort, now sounded like a mournful dirge. General Petrov, his usual steely composure cracked, paced the confines of the bunker like a caged animal. He muttered to himself, snippets of Russian prayers and curses intermingled. He looked older, smaller, the weight of the world, quite literally, crushing him. I, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of calm. A detached acceptance of the inevitable. Perhaps it was shock, or perhaps the relentless fear had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a hollow emptiness. That night, the tremors intensified, evolving into full-blown earthquakes. The bunker groaned and shuddered, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. We huddled together, a small, terrified cluster in the face of unimaginable power. The lights flickered erratically, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls. Then, the screaming started. Not human screams, but something deeper, more primal. It resonated through the earth, through the very metal of the bunker, vibrating in our bones. It was the sound of the planet itself, crying out in agony. The seismograph went haywire, the needle whipping back and forth across the paper, leaving a chaotic scribble of impending doom. Dr. Aris stared at it, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. It's communicating," he stammered, his voice barely audible above the deafening roar. We stared at him, bewildered. Communicating? With what? With whom? He pointed to the erratic pattern on the seismograph. "These aren't random tremors, they're structured, almost linguistic." He grabbed a pen and, with trembling hands, began to transcribe the pattern onto a fresh sheet of paper. As he worked, a chilling realization dawned on me. The reactor wasn't just a source of energy. It was something more, something sentient. Hours passed, the earth groaning and shuddering around us. Dr. Aris, driven by a desperate, almost manic energy, continued his work, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale and drawn. Finally, he slumped back, letting the pen fall from his grasp. I think I've got it," he whispered, his voice raspy. He pushed the paper towards us. It was covered in a series of strange, angular symbols, unlike any language I'd ever seen. But there was something about them, something undeniably alien. What does it say?" Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Aris took a deep, shuddering breath. It's a warning," he said, his voice laced with a chilling dread. "A warning, and a farewell." He translated the message, his voice trembling with each word. The ancient reactor, the heart of our world, wasn't just dying. It was transforming. It was reaching out, not to us, but to something beyond. The message spoke of a cosmic cycle, of ancient beings and unimaginable power. It spoke of a coming transformation, a cosmic rebirth that would consume our world and usher in a new era. An era that would have no place for humanity. The final words of the message echoed in the confines of the bunker, chilling us to the bone. The cycle completes. The gate opens. We return. The ground beneath us heaved violently. The screaming intensified, morphing into a deep, resonating hum that seemed to permeate everything. The lights went out, plunging us into absolute darkness. In the suffocating blackness, I felt a hand grasp mine. It was Maria's. Her grip was tight, desperate. We huddled together, waiting for the end. Waiting for the gate to open. Waiting for them. The last thing I remember is the feeling of the earth falling away beneath us, the sensation of weightlessness, and the echoing roar of something vast and ancient awakening from its eons-long slumber. Part 20. The Silent Bloom. The tremors had ceased, replaced by a chilling stillness. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping world, but the held-breath silence before a scream. Above, the pulsating aurora had intensified, painting the sky in sickening hues of violet and emerald. Its light illuminated the ravaged landscape, revealing the grotesque mutations taking root. The crimson flora, once confined to small patches, had exploded across the land. Bulbous, pulsing vines snaked around crumbling buildings, their thorny surfaces glistening with an oily residue. Bizarre, bioluminescent fungi sprouted from the cracked earth, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow. The air, thick with the metallic tang of the mutations, carried a faint, sickeningly sweet aroma. We huddled in the dilapidated observatory, our dwindling supplies offering little comfort. Sasha, her eyes hollow and distant, clutched the modified Geiger counter. Its needle, previously erratic, now sat stubbornly in the red, ticking faintly like a morbid metronome. The background radiation had plateaued, but at a level that should have rendered us lifeless. Yet, we persisted, grotesque parodies of life. "It's changing us," Elias rasped, his voice barely a whisper. His skin, once a healthy bronze, had taken on a sickly, grayish pallor. Dark, branching veins, pulsing with a faint internal luminescence, crisscrossed his arms and neck. We all bore similar markings, grotesque tattoos etched by the Earth's malignant heart. I examined my own hand, the pulsing veins a macabre roadmap beneath my skin. The changes weren't just cosmetic. We were stronger, faster, our senses heightened to an almost unbearable degree. But these enhancements came at a cost. We were becoming less human. Our emotions dulled, replaced by a cold, alien detachment. We were becoming reflections of the corrupted world around us. The silence was broken by a low, guttural growl. It emanated from outside, close to the observatory walls. We grabbed our makeshift weapons, our hearts pounding against our ribs with unnatural force. Peering through a crack in the boarded-up window, I saw it. It was one of the mutated dogs, but transformed beyond recognition. Its skeletal frame was draped in pulsating muscle, its fur replaced by coarse, chitinous plates. Its eyes glowed with the same unnatural luminescence as the plants, and its jaws were lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It paced back and forth, sniffing the air, its growls deepening into a chilling, almost intelligent snarl. More followed, their grotesque forms silhouetted against the pulsing aurora. They circled the observatory, their collective growls a symphony of impending doom. We were trapped, surrounded by the mutated horrors birthed by the Earth's corrupted core. Days blurred into nights, the relentless siege continuing unabated. We rationed our dwindling supplies, the gnawing hunger a constant companion to our fear. The mutations continued their insidious march, twisting our bodies and minds. We spoke less, our communication reduced to grunts and gestures. The human part of us was slowly being consumed by the alien influence. One night, as the mutated creatures howled outside, Sasha spoke, her voice startling in its clarity. "The core, it's not just changing the surface. It's communicating." We stared at her, our dull minds struggling to grasp the meaning of her words. "The radiation," she continued, her eyes fixated on the pulsing aurora, "it's not just energy. It's information. The core is sending a message." "What kind of message?" Elias croaked, his voice barely audible. Sasha's eyes widened, a flicker of terror momentarily breaking through her detachment. "It's an invitation," she whispered, her voice trembling. "An invitation to join something else." A chilling understanding settled over us. The Earth's core wasn't just destroying the world. It was remaking it in its own image, and we, the survivors, were being offered a place in this new, horrifying reality. A place beyond human comprehension. The creatures outside intensified their assault, their growls turning into a high-pitched whine, like a siren's call. The walls of the observatory shuddered, the boards groaning under the relentless pressure. We looked at each other, our faces illuminated by the sickly glow of the aurora and the pulsing veins beneath our skin. The invitation had been extended. The choice was ours: to cling to the fading remnants of our humanity, or to embrace the horrifying transformation offered by the Earth's corrupted heart. The silence in the observatory was broken only by the relentless pounding of the mutated creatures against the walls and the faint, sickeningly sweet aroma of the blooming earth. The end, it seemed, was not extinction, but something far more terrifying. A silent, insidious assimilation. Part 21. The whispers grow louder. The crimson glow pulsating from the chasm had intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with malevolent life. The heat radiating from it was no longer a dry, baking heat. It was now a wet, suffocating heat, like standing in the breath of a colossal, feverish beast. The air itself seemed thick, viscous, almost palpable, clinging to our skin like a second, unwelcome layer. The ground trembled with increasing frequency. Not the violent, earth-shattering tremors of before, but a low, persistent thrumming, like the heartbeat of some gargantuan entity slowly awakening from an eons-long slumber. It resonated deep within our chests, a physical manifestation of the dread that permeated the air. We had retreated further back, establishing a new, precarious camp amidst the skeletal remains of a petrified forest. The trees, long ago turned to stone by the reactor's erratic energies, stood like macabre sentinels, their branches reaching towards the blood-red sky in silent supplication. The silence, however, was becoming increasingly punctuated. At first, it was a subtle, almost subliminal sound, a low, humming drone that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath our feet. We dismissed it as the aftershocks of the reactor's pulsations, another unsettling but ultimately harmless side effect of the encroaching anomaly. Then it began to change. The humming morphed into a whispering. Faint, indistinct murmurs, like voices carried on a distant wind. They were alien, otherworldly, impossible to decipher, yet undeniably there, creeping into the edges of our consciousness, prickling at the hairs on the back of our necks. We huddled closer, our fear a tangible entity in the suffocating air. Dr. Aris, his face gaunt and pale, clutched his modified Geiger counter, its needle swinging wildly, as if struggling to quantify the sheer strangeness of the phenomena engulfing us. "It's evolving," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "The energy signature. It's becoming complex." "Complex how?" Elena asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Aris shook his head, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "I don't know. It's like it's trying to communicate." The whispers grew louder. They began to coalesce, taking on a semblance of structure, of form. They were no longer random sounds, but distinct syllables, strung together in a bizarre, dissonant melody. It felt as though the very air was vibrating with an unseen language, a language older than humanity, older than the earth itself. The first to succumb was Jackson. He had always been the most stoic of the group, the rock upon which we leaned in times of crisis. But the constant, insidious whispers seemed to burrow into his mind, chipping away at his sanity. He began to mutter to himself, responding to the unseen voices, his eyes glazed over with a vacant, unsettling stare. Then, one night, under the baleful crimson glow of the reactor, he simply walked away. We tried to stop him, but he brushed us aside with unexpected strength, his eyes fixed on the pulsating chasm, a strange, serene smile playing on his lips. He walked towards the abyss, his silhouette swallowed by the crimson light, the whispers swirling around him like a welcoming embrace. We called out to him, but he didn't turn back. He just kept walking, until he disappeared into the heart of the anomaly, swallowed by the earth itself. The whispers followed him, fading into a low, guttural hum that resonated within the very bones of the petrified forest. We were left standing there, paralyzed by fear and grief, the enormity of what we were facing crushing us beneath its weight. We had come seeking answers, seeking to understand the strange anomaly at the heart of our planet. Instead, we had found something far more terrifying, something that defied comprehension, something that was slowly, inexorably consuming us, one by one. The earth thrummed beneath our feet, the whispers weaving their way through our thoughts, promising oblivion, promising understanding, promising something. And in the crimson glow of the dying world, we knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were not going to escape. The reactor had chosen us, and the whispers would not be silenced. The earth whispered, we listened, and we waited. The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with a metallic tang that clung to the back of our throats. We stumbled through the ravaged landscape, the once familiar city now a skeletal husk, buildings twisted and warped as if some unseen hand had wrung them dry. The crimson glow pulsating from the widening fissures in the earth painted the sky in a horrifying, apocalyptic tableau. We were shadows moving through a dying world, propelled by the desperate hope of finding sanctuary, a hope that dwindled with each agonizing step. Elena, her face pale and drawn, clutched the archaic amulet, our supposed key to silencing the reactor, like the lifeline. Its dull metal surface seemed to throb faintly, a counterpoint to the rhythmic shuddering of the earth. I watched her, my heart heavy. The weight of our mission, the sheer impossibility of it, threatened to crush us both. How much further, Daniel? She whispered, her voice hoarse. The wind whipped around us, carrying the groans of the dying planet. I shook my head, unable to meet her gaze. I don't know. The map, it's changing. The parchment, passed down through generations of keepers, depicted the path to the reactor's access point, a hidden chamber somewhere beneath the shattered city. But the landscape itself was undergoing a terrifying metamorphosis. Streets buckled and vanished into gaping chasms, familiar landmarks twisted into unrecognizable shapes. The map, once our guide, was now a testament to a world that no longer existed. We pressed on, driven by a primal instinct to survive. The tremors grew more frequent, more violent, the ground beneath our feet a churning, unstable sea. The air grew hotter, laced with the acrid stench of sulfur. The crimson glow intensified, casting long, dancing shadows that mimicked the grotesque figures we had seen emerging from the fissures, the mutated remnants of life exposed to the reactor's raw power. We found shelter in the hollowed-out shell of what was once a grand theater. The roof had collapsed, leaving the stage exposed to the crimson sky. Dust and debris swirled around us, illuminated by the eerie light. Elena sank to the ground, her shoulders slumped in defeat. It's no use, Daniel, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We're lost. We're all lost. I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her arm. We can't give up, Elena. Not now. We have to keep trying. Even as I spoke, I felt a cold dread creeping into my heart. The tremors were almost constant now, the ground vibrating with a low, guttural hum. The air crackled with an unseen energy. The world around us felt as though it was on the verge of imploding. Suddenly, a low, resonant hum filled the air, growing in intensity. The amulet in Elena's hand began to glow, its dull metal surface now radiating an intense, white light. She gasped, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. It's reacting, she stammered, holding the amulet aloft. The light pulsed, casting flickering shadows on the ruined walls around us. The ground beneath us lurched violently. A gaping fissure opened up just feet from where we sat, spewing forth a wave of searing heat and noxious fumes. From the depths of the fissure, a figure emerged, silhouetted against the crimson glow. It was tall and skeletal, its limbs elongated and distorted, its skin a translucent, sickly green. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light. It was one of them. One of the mutated creatures born from the reactor's power. But this one was different. It exuded an aura of power, of ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was as if the reactor itself had taken form. Elena scrambled to her feet, clutching the amulet. We have to go, she whispered, her voice trembling. Now. We turned to flee, but the creature moved with terrifying speed. It lunged towards us, its skeletal fingers outstretched. Elena screamed, raising the amulet as a shield. The white light intensified, blindingly bright. A shockwave of energy erupted outwards, slamming into the creature. It recoiled, hissing and snarling, its form flickering and distorting. The amulet pulsed again, and the creature screamed, a sound that echoed through the ruined city, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. It dissolved into a shimmering mist, then vanished completely. The light from the amulet faded, leaving us blinking in the crimson gloom. The earth continued to tremble, the fissures continued to glow, but the immediate danger had passed. Elena stood, her chest heaving, the amulet still clutched tightly in her hand. She looked at me, her eyes shining with a newfound determination. "It works," she whispered. "It actually works." For a brief moment, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't lost after all. Maybe we had a chance. But even as the thought formed in my mind, a new tremor, stronger than any before, shook the earth. The ground beneath our feet began to crumble, and the ruined theater, our temporary sanctuary, began to collapse around us. The crimson glow intensified, swallowing the world in its infernal light. The reactor was awakening, and it was far more powerful than we could have ever imagined. Part 23. The Whispering Bones. The air crackled, not with electricity, but with something far more unsettling, anticipation. We stood on the precipice, the chasm yawning before us like a gateway to hell itself. The pulsating red glow, emanating from the depths, painted the jagged rock faces in a hellish light, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. The heat was intense, radiating outwards in waves, carrying with it the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of ozone. Dr. Aris, her face gaunt and pale, clutched the modified seismograph, her knuckles white. "It's accelerating," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The pulsations, they're getting stronger, faster." Below, the crimson glow intensified, pulsing in a rhythmic beat that echoed the frantic thumping of my own heart. The ground trembled beneath our feet, the vibrations growing more violent with each passing moment. The whispering had returned, louder now, a cacophony of distorted voices rising from the abyss, weaving together into a chilling, incomprehensible chorus. It felt as though the earth itself was groaning, screaming in agony. "What are they saying?" I croaked, my throat dry. Aris shook her head, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. "I don't know, but it sounds pleased." The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Pleased? What could possibly find pleasure in this impending apocalypse? Suddenly, the ground beneath us lurched violently, throwing us to our knees. A deafening roar erupted from the chasm, a sound that defied description, part shriek, part growl, part the grinding of tectonic plates. The red glow exploded into a blinding white light, forcing us to shield our eyes. When I dared to look again, I gasped. Skeletal structures, colossal and grotesque, were rising from the chasm. Not the fossilized remains of dinosaurs, but something different. Their bones were a sickly, luminescent green, pulsing with the same infernal light as the core. They were impossibly large, dwarfing even the tallest skyscrapers, their forms twisted and contorted into shapes that defied natural law. Some resembled giant, skeletal serpents, their rib cages vast and gaping. Others were humanoid, but with elongated limbs and skulls that seemed stretched and distorted, as if by some unimaginable force. These weren't just bones, they were animated, moving with a horrifying fluidity. The skeletal serpents uncoiled, their vertebrae clicking and grinding, reaching out with clawed, bony fingers towards the surface. The humanoid figures stood, their empty sockets seeming to fix on us, their jaws opening and closing in silent screams. What are those things?" stammered Sergeant Miller, his voice trembling. He gripped his rifle tightly, but the weapon seemed pathetically inadequate against these monstrous apparitions. Aris's eyes were fixed on the seismograph, her face ashen. They're reacting to the core," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the deafening roar and the whispering that had grown to a fever pitch. "They're connected to it somehow." The ground continued to heave and shudder, cracks spider webbing across the surface. The chasm widened, revealing more and more of the nightmarish landscape below. The air grew thick with a suffocating dread, a palpable sense of impending doom. One of the skeletal serpents lunged forward, its massive skull reaching towards us, its jaw lined with razor-sharp teeth. We scrambled back, our hearts pounding in our chests. The ground gave way beneath us, and we tumbled down a steep incline, the monstrous figures looming above us, their skeletal forms silhouetted against the blinding white light. We landed hard, the breath knocked from our lungs. As I struggled to my feet, I looked back up at the chasm. The skeletal figures were descending, their movements slow but inexorable, their bony feet crushing the rock beneath them. The whispering intensified, filling the air with a chilling, otherworldly chorus. It sounded like celebration. We were trapped, cornered between the monstrous creatures emerging from the Earth's core and the collapsing world around us. Hope, a flickering ember just moments ago, was now extinguished, leaving behind only the cold, suffocating darkness of despair. The Earth was not dying, it was being reborn. And we were merely witnesses to its horrifying transformation, offerings to the ancient, malevolent power that dwelled within its heart. The whispering bones were coming for us, and their song was a prelude to our extinction. The tremors intensified, not in frequency, but in the sheer gut-wrenching force they exerted. Buildings, already weakened by previous quakes, groaned and swayed, their skeletons exposed like picked clean ribs. The air, thick with the metallic tang of the planet's blood, vibrated against our skin, a physical manifestation of the Earth's agony. We huddled in the relative safety of the reinforced bunker, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the rhythmic shudders. Hope, once a fragile flame, had been snuffed out entirely. The transmissions from other outposts, previously sporadic, had ceased. Silence, broken only by the low, guttural rumble of the dying planet, filled the air. We were alone, stranded on a vessel hurtling towards oblivion. Dr. Aris, her face a mask of exhaustion and despair, clutched the modified seismograph, its needle thrashing wildly against the restraints. "It's accelerating," she whispered, her voice hollow. "The core, it's destabilizing faster than we predicted." "What does that mean?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible above the grinding of tectonic plates. Aris looked at her, eyes reflecting the flickering light, and a chilling truth dawned upon us. "It means it's not just decaying. It's changing." The implication hung heavy in the air, heavier than the dust that rained down from the cracked ceiling. We had theorized that the core, this ancient reactor, was simply burning out. But now, change. What could that mean for a power source that dictated the planet's very existence? Over the next few hours, the tremors subsided, replaced by an unnerving stillness. The silence was more terrifying than the quakes. It was the silence of a predator before the kill. Then, a low hum began to permeate the bunker, a deep resonant thrum that vibrated in our bones. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging us into absolute darkness. Panic flared, brief but intense. The hum grew louder, transforming into a high-pitched whine that pressed against our eardrums. Then, a voice, ancient and alien, echoed in the darkness, seeming to emanate from the very walls around us. It wasn't a language we could understand, but its intent was clear. Pure, unadulterated power. The fear was palpable, choking. We huddled together, a small island of humanity adrift in an ocean of the unknown. I reached out, grasping Alina's hand, finding solace in the shared terror. Her hand was cold, trembling. Then, the floor beneath us lurched. Cracks spider-webbed across the concrete, glowing with an eerie internal light. The humming intensified, and the alien voice rose in a crescendo, a symphony of power and destruction. The walls began to glow, the concrete turning translucent, revealing the churning, incandescent mass beneath. The Earth itself was becoming transparent, revealing the heart of the ancient reactor, now pulsing with a malevolent energy. We were seeing the core, not through scientific instruments, but with our own eyes. It was a swirling vortex of light and energy, unlike anything we could have imagined. It was beautiful, in a terrifying, apocalyptic way. Within the swirling chaos, shapes began to form, vast and incomprehensible. They shifted and writhed, like colossal beings trapped within the core, now awakening from an eons-long slumber. The alien voice intensified, echoing the frantic beating of our hearts. The ground beneath us disintegrated, and we fell, screaming, into the incandescent heart of the earth. The heat was unimaginable, yet we didn't burn. We floated, suspended within the swirling energy, bathed in the light of the ancient reactor. The shapes within the core grew clearer, and we realized with dawning horror that they weren't just shapes. They were entities, vast, ancient entities of pure energy, their forms shifting and reforming within the chaotic vortex. They looked at us, or rather, we felt their gaze, a palpable pressure that bore down on our souls. There was no malice in their regard, no hatred, no anger. Just curiosity, a cold, detached curiosity that chilled us to the core more than the intense heat. The alien voice spoke again, this time directly into our minds. It wasn't a language, but a transfer of knowledge, of understanding. We understood then, the Earth's core wasn't a reactor, not in the way we understood it. It was a prison for these entities, ancient beings of pure energy, trapped for eons within the heart of our planet. And now, the prison was breaking. The entities reached out, their energy tendrils caressing our minds, probing our memories, our emotions, our very essence. We were laid bare, our entire existence exposed to these cosmic beings. And in that moment, we understood the final, chilling truth. The Earth wasn't dying, it was being transformed, reshaped by the awakening entities into something new, something alien. And we, the last remnants of humanity, were merely witnesses to the birth of a new cosmic order. The final act of this terrestrial drama was about to begin. And we, the insignificant players, were front row center. The silence was the worst. Not the silence of the dead city, choked with ash and twisted metal, but the silence from below. The rhythmic thump, the heartbeat of the reactor that had haunted our lives for what felt like an eternity, was gone. It had been our constant, terrifying companion, a morbid metronome counting down to some unknown doom. Now, the absence of that rhythmic pulse felt even more ominous. We, the handful of us who had survived the initial quakes and the subsequent mutations, huddled in the ruined husk of a skyscraper, staring at the blackened sky. The sun, once a comforting presence, was now a malevolent eye peering through the perpetual twilight of ash. Even the air felt wrong, thick with an unnatural stillness. Elias, our de facto leader by virtue of being the least insane, broke the silence. "It's over," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Is it?" Mara's voice was brittle, laced with a fear that mirrored our own. Her skin, once a warm brown, now shimmered with an unnatural iridescence, a side effect of the reactor's fluctuating energy fields. We were all changing, becoming something else. I ran a hand over my arm, tracing the faint, pulsing veins that seemed to glow with a sickly internal light. We were connected to the reactor, to the Earth itself, in a way we never could have imagined. Its silence felt like a severed limb, a phantom pain in the core of our being. Then, the ground trembled. Not the violent, bone-jarring tremors we'd become accustomed to, but a subtle vibration, a deep, almost imperceptible shudder. It felt like the Earth was inhaling. "It's not over," I murmured, a chill snaking down my spine. The tremors intensified, growing into a low hum that resonated deep within our bones. The air crackled with static, the dust around us swirling in unseen currents. The iridescent patterns on Mara's skin pulsed brighter, mirroring the growing hum. A low, guttural groan echoed from below, a sound that bypassed our ears and resonated directly in our skulls. It was a sound of immense power, of ancient, unimaginable forces stirring. It wasn't the rhythmic thump of the reactor, but something far older, far more primal. The ground beneath us buckled, fissures opening up in the concrete, spewing forth a noxious, phosphorescent gas. The city around us, already a ruin, began to crumble further, buildings collapsing into dust as the earth writhed in agony. Then, we saw it. A crack, a gaping maw in the earth, stretching for miles across the ravaged landscape. It wasn't a fault line, not a natural fissure, but a clean, surgical incision, as if the planet itself had been cut open with a cosmic scalpel. From the depths of that abyss, a blinding light erupted, swallowing the twilight and painting the sky in hues of impossible colors. The hum intensified, becoming a deafening roar, a symphony of unimaginable power. The phosphorescent gas swirled and coalesced, forming grotesque, shifting shapes that danced in the unearthly light. The air itself seemed to vibrate, to shimmer with an almost tangible energy. We were drawn towards the chasm, our bodies moving involuntarily, pulled by an irresistible force. The iridescent patterns on our skin blazed, resonating with the pulsating light from below. We were no longer individuals, but extensions of the earth, puppets on strings pulled by the ancient power awakening beneath our feet. As we reached the precipice, the light intensified, blinding us with its raw power. I caught a glimpse of the others, their faces contorted in a mixture of awe and terror, their bodies shimmering and distorting, becoming something other. Then, the ground beneath us gave way. We fell into the light. The sensation wasn't of falling, but of merging, of becoming one with the earth, with the ancient power that resided at its core. The light enveloped us, dissolving our physical forms, our thoughts, our very identities. We were no longer human, but part of something vast, something ancient, something beyond comprehension. And in that moment, as our individual consciousnesses faded, we understood. The reactor wasn't the source of the power, but merely a symptom, a flickering candle flame compared to the inferno beneath. The earth wasn't dying, it was transforming. The ancient power, the true heart of the planet, had awakened. And we, the remnants of humanity, were becoming its vessels, its instruments, its children. The last thing I saw, before my consciousness dissolved completely, was the earth itself, glowing with an infernal light, pulsating with the rhythm of a newly awakened heart. The silence was gone, replaced by a symphony of cosmic power, a song of creation and destruction, a testament to the terrifying, awe-inspiring power of a world reborn. And in that final moment, I felt peace. A terrifying, alien peace, but peace nonetheless. We were home.